scammers thought they had the Sheikh trapped for $200 million. Waitress whispered in Arabic and ruined everything. $200 million. A private dining room in Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant. A pen already uncapped, hovering above a signature line that would seal the fate of a family's legacy. Sheikh Abdul Salam, Abdul to the few who earned his trust, had spent 3 years tracking this document. His lawyers had verified every clause, his historians had authenticated every detail, his advisors had given their blessing. The wire transfer was staged, the deal was done. But as the pen lowered, the only person in the room who knew the truth wasn't a lawyer, a historian, or a financial advisor. It was the middle-aged black waitress standing silently behind his chair, holding a tray with 2 glasses of water. And she was about to risk everything, her job, her anonymity, her safety, with 5 whispered words in a language no one expected her to speak. Rain streaked the windows of the veranda, one of those Manhattan establishments so exclusive that its name never appeared on any sign. The kind of place where CEOs negotiated mergers over $400 stakes and where silence was the most expensive thing on the menu. The carpets absorbed footsteps, the lighting absorbed secrets. And into this world, 5 nights a week for nearly 8 years, walked Benita Brooks. At 53, Benny, as everyone called her, had perfected the art of invisibility. Her uniform was immaculate, black vest, white shirt, posture straight but unremarkable. Her hair was pulled back tight. Her face was composed into the professional blankness that wealthy clients expected from staff. She had learned long ago that in rooms like this, being seen was dangerous. Being invisible kept you employed. But Benita Brooks was not just a waitress. She was a linguist. Please hit that subscribe button, like and share this video as we continue with the story. Before life narrowed, before the debts, before the caregiving, before she had to choose between dreams and survival, Benny had been a graduate student in linguistics at Columbia, specializing in Semitic languages and historical Arabic dialects. Her grandmother, Esther Mae Brooks, an Alabama-born woman who had somehow learned 5 languages and prayed in 3, had taught her Arabic at the kitchen table when she was barely old enough to hold a pencil. "Listen to how language breathes," her grandmother used to say, her weathered hands tracing letters that curved like rivers. "It will tell you when something is lying." That was 30 years ago, before her mother's stroke, before dropping out to become the breadwinner, before the academic world, with its unpaid fellowships and closed doors, had no room for a black woman who couldn't network at cocktail parties because she was working the night shift to keep the lights on. So she buried that part of herself. She hid at the veranda, where the clientele was wealthy enough to never recognize anyone from her former life, and she learned to disappear. That Tuesday evening, her manager pulled her aside before service. "Brooks," Mr. Castellano's voice was clipped. "The Astor Room. Private signing. Sheikh Abdul Salam and guests. Your primary service." He straightened his cuffs without meeting her eyes. "These are not ordinary clients. You do not speak. You do not engage. You anticipate needs. Understood?" "Yes, sir." "This is not a dinner," he continued. "It's a closing. The room has been swept. Security is already positioned. Whatever happens in that room tonight, you saw nothing." Benny nodded. She had served enough of these events to know the weight of them, the documents, the lawyers, the wire transfers that moved more money in an evening than she would see in 10 lifetimes. At 7:15, the guests arrived. Sheikh Abdul Salam was smaller than Benny expected. Late 50s, trim grey beard, eyes that seemed to carry centuries of history behind them. He wore a beautifully tailored charcoal suit rather than traditional robes. There was something careful about him, dignified, like a man who understood that some wounds never fully healed. With him came 2 advisors and a lawyer. serious men who spoke in hushed Arabic and deferred to the Sheikh with obvious respect. 5 minutes later, the other party arrived. Bruce Wallace entered the room like a man who had already won. Silver hair combed back, navy suit that probably cost more than Benny's annual salary. His smile was warm, practiced, and utterly predatory. Behind him came his team, a corporate lawyer, a document specialist, and a historian carrying a climate-controlled case as if it contained the Holy Grail itself. "Your Excellency," Bruce said, extending his hand, "today we restore what history stole." Benny moved like smoke. She poured water, still not sparkling. She'd read the preference sheet and served the amuse-bouche without making eye contact. She was furniture. She was air. The historian, a severe woman named Dr. Harlow, placed the case on the white linen tablecloth and unlatched it with ceremonial care. Inside, nestled in black velvet, lay an aged document, cream-coloured vellum covered in dense, elegant Arabic script. "The Al-Rashid Charter," Dr. Harlow announced, "dated to the early 11th century. The original land grant establishing your family's territorial rights across what is now contested coastal property worth, conservatively, several $billion." Bruce leaned forward. Carbon dating confirmed by 3 independent labs. Ink analysis consistent with the period. Provenance traced through Ottoman archives. "This document ends 100 years of legal disputes, Your Excellency. It doesn't just prove your claim, it makes your claim irrefutable." Sheikh Abdul Salam stared at the document. His hands trembled slightly. Benny could see it. This wasn't just business to him. This was legacy. This was justice. This was everything his family had lost. 200 million, Bruce said softly, is a small price for what this represents. The Sheikh's advisor, an older historian named Dr. Mansour, studied the document through a magnifying glass. "The calligraphy is extraordinary," he murmured. "The seal is perfect. I would stake my reputation on its authenticity." Benny was refilling water glasses when her eyes drifted across the document. She wasn't reading it, not consciously. She was feeling it, the way her grandmother had taught her, the rhythm of the letters, the spacing, the flow. And something was wrong. Not obvious wrong, not loud wrong, quiet wrong, the kind of wrong you feel before you understand. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "Don't trust perfection, baby. Perfection is the mark of the forger. The truth is messy." Benny's eyes moved faster now, tracing the script. The calligraphy was beautiful, too beautiful. The diacritical marks were consistent in a way that authentic historical documents rarely were. And then she saw it. A single word buried in a sentence about trade routes and territorial boundaries, a reference to a commodity that didn't exist in that region until nearly 2 centuries after this document was supposedly written. Benny's blood turned to ice. She almost dropped the water pitcher. The document was fake. Not just imperfect, fabricated. Someone had forged a masterpiece, gotten the chemistry right, gotten the script right, but had made a single, fatal error in meaning. And $200 million was about to change hands. Benny stood frozen, the water pitcher growing heavy in her grip. Across the table, Sheikh Abdul Salam lifted the pen. His lawyer slid the contract forward. Bruce Wallace's smile widened. She could stay silent. She was supposed to stay silent. Invisibility was safety. Speaking was suicide. But if she didn't speak, a lie would win, and Benita Brooks had spent her whole life watching lies win. The water pitcher trembled in Benny's hands. Across the table, Bruce Wallace was speaking again, his voice smooth as aged whiskey, but Benny barely heard him. Her mind had slipped backward. 30 years, 2,000 miles, to a kitchen table in Birmingham, where an old woman's hands moved like prayers across paper. Again, baby girl. Trace it again. Esther May Brooks had been 63 years old when she started teaching her granddaughter Arabic. She'd learned it herself from a Moroccan missionary who'd come through Alabama in 1952, a man who believed language was the doorway to God. Esther May had walked through that door and never come back. "Your tongue is lazy," her grandmother would say, not unkindly, adjusting young Benny's grip on the pencil. Arabic doesn't forgive lazy. Every letter carries weight. Every dot changes meaning. You want to speak to history? Then speak precisely. Benny had been 7. She didn't understand why her grandmother cared so much about a language nobody in their neighborhood spoke. But she understood the feeling of those evenings, the yellow kitchen light, the smell of coffee and paper, the sense that something sacred was being passed from one pair of hands to another. In the private dining room, Bruce leaned toward Sheikh Abdul Salam. "Your Excellency, I understand the weight of this moment. Your family has waited generations for this validation. Let's not prolong the waiting." His voice was gentle, patient, the voice of a man who had practiced compassion until it became a weapon. Benny watched him work. She had seen men like Bruce before, not this wealthy, not this polished, but the same architecture underneath. Men who studied your hunger and fed you just enough hope to keep you starving. She had been 24 when her mother's stroke shattered everything. Benny had been 2 semesters from completing her master's in linguistics at Columbia. Her thesis on dialectical variations in medieval Arabic trade documents had earned praise from professors who rarely praised anyone. She had been brilliant. She had been visible. Then came the phone call. Her mother couldn't speak, couldn't walk, couldn't be left alone. Medicaid covered some things. Family covered nothing. There was no family left but Benny. Her academic advisor had been sympathetic for exactly 1 semester before the funding dried up and the fellowship went to someone whose mother hadn't betrayed her body. "You can defer," he'd said. "Come back when things stabilize." Things never stabilized. They simply became permanent. Benny moved back to New York to be closer to the rehabilitation facility. She took the first job she could find, waitressing at a midtown steakhouse. Temporary, she told herself, just until Mama improved. Just until the bills stopped drowning her. Temporary became a year became 5, 5 became invisible. "The calligraphy alone is worth the investment," Dr. Harlow was saying now, gesturing toward the document. "We're not just selling paper, we're selling proof." The Sheikh's advisor nodded slowly. Dr. Mansour had been examining the vellum with reverent eyes, the eyes of a man who wanted something to be true so badly that truth became optional. Benny knew those eyes. She'd seen them in her own mirror all those years ago when she told herself she'd go back to school, when she told herself the dreams were just delayed, not dead. Her grandmother had passed in 2011. Quietly, the way she'd done everything, in her sleep, in her own bed, with a Quran on the nightstand and Arabic prayers still wet on her lips. Benny had inherited nothing but language. No money, no property, just the ability to read a script that most Americans couldn't identify, to hear the rhythm of words written 1,000 years ago, to feel when something was lying. "Words carry souls," Esther May used to say. "Not just meanings. You learn to listen. You'll hear what people are really saying, even when they're not talking." For 20 years, Benny had kept that inheritance buried. She'd served food to men who made decisions that shaped nations, and she'd never once let them see that she understood more than they did. Invisibility was armor. Silence was survival. But armor gets heavy. And tonight, standing 3 feet from a lie that was about to devour a good man's future, Benny felt the weight of every word she'd ever swallowed pressing against her chest. Bruce checked his watch, a gesture so subtle only someone watching for it would notice. "Your Excellency," he said softly, "the wire instructions are ready. Once you sign, Your family's legacy is secured. Permanently. The Sheikh lifted his pen, and Benita Brooks, the woman no one saw, made a decision that would cost her everything she'd built and return everything she'd buried. Benny's eyes wouldn't leave the document. She had tried. For the past several minutes she had tried to focus on the water glasses, the napkins, the slow mechanical rituals of service, but her gaze kept drifting back to that cream-coloured vellum, pulled toward it like a ship toward rocks. The calligraphy was exquisite. Whoever had created this document understood Arabic script at a level that most forgers never achieved. The letter forms were consistent. The spacing was period-appropriate. The ink had aged beautifully or been made to look like it had. But something was breathing wrong. "Listen to how language breathes," her grandmother's voice whispered. "It will tell you when something is lying." Benny shifted position, angling herself slightly closer to the table under the pretense of adjusting a water glass. Her eyes moved across the dense script, not reading word by word, but feeling the rhythm of it, the way a musician hears a wrong note before they can name it. "Your great-great-grandfather understood something that modern men have forgotten," Bruce was saying, his voice intimate, confiding. "He understood that land is memory. Territory is identity. What was taken from your family wasn't just property, Your Excellency. It was selfhood." Sheikh Abdul Salam's jaw tightened. Benny saw it, the flicker of old pain behind his careful composure. "My father spent his final years trying to prove our claims," the Sheikh said quietly. "He died believing he had failed his ancestors." Bruce nodded slowly, reverently. "Then let this be his vindication. Let this be your vindication." Benny recognized the technique. She had watched enough negotiations in this room to understand how men like Bruce operated. They didn't sell documents. They sold wounds. They found the tender place in a man's history and pressed until he would pay anything to make it stop hurting. Her eyes caught on a phrase near the bottom of the vellum, a description of territorial boundaries, standard language for a land grant of that era. The sentence referenced trade routes, water rights, and... Benny's breath stopped. "Kawa." The word sat in the middle of the sentence like a stone in clear water. Kahwa. Coffee. The document referenced coffee trade as part of the territorial rights being granted. But this charter was supposedly dated to the early 11th century, 1020 AD, according to Dr. Harlow's presentation. Coffee didn't exist in the Arab world until the 15th century. The first reliable records of coffee cultivation came from Yemen in the 1400s, 400 years after this document claimed to have been written. Benny's hands went cold. It was such a small mistake, a single word in hundreds. The forger had done everything else perfectly: the vellum, the ink, the script, the seal. They had fooled carbon dating, fooled spectroscopic analysis, fooled historians who had spent their entire careers studying documents exactly like this one. But they had forgotten to check the meaning. They had trusted chemistry over language, science over story. And now Benny stood in a room full of experts, holding the only knowledge that mattered, and no one would ever believe her. "The wire transfer is prepared," Bruce said gently. "One signature, and your family's honor is restored." Dr. Mansour placed a hand on the Sheikh's shoulder. "It is authentic, Your Excellency. I would stake everything on it." The Sheikh looked at the document one final time. Benny watched his face. The grief, the hope, the desperate need to believe that justice was finally possible. He was not a foolish man. He was a wounded man, and wounded men make decisions with their scars. "Very well," Sheikh Abdul Salam said. He lifted the pen. Benny's pulse roared in her ears. "Stay silent. Stay invisible. You're just a waitress? You're nobody. You have $47 in your account and a job you cannot afford to lose. The pen moved toward paper. But if you don't speak, a lie wins. Again, like it always wins, like it won when you lost your scholarship, like it won when the world decided you were invisible. Bruce Wallace's smile widened by a fraction of an inch. Your grandmother didn't teach you this language so you could watch men be robbed. The tip of the pen touched the signature line, and Benny Brooks opened her mouth. Sir. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a blade through silk. Every head turned. Sir. The word hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Sheikh Abdul Salam's pen froze half an inch above the signature line. Bruce Wallace's smile flickered. Just for a moment. Just enough for Benny to see the predator beneath the polish. Mr. Castellano, the restaurant manager, materialized from somewhere near the door, his face pale with horror. Benita, what are you? But Benny was already moving. She set down the water pitcher with steady hands and stepped closer to the Sheikh's chair. Close enough to smell the old paper. Close enough to see the ink that had fooled everyone. She leaned down and whispered 5 words in flawless Arabic. La tuwaki, al-wathika muzawwara. Do not sign. The document is forged. The effect was immediate. Sheikh Abdul Salam's head snapped toward her, his dark eyes wide with shock. Not anger. Not yet. Something closer to disbelief, as if the furniture had suddenly started speaking. You speak Arabic? He asked, switching to the language instinctively. Yes, Benny replied in the same tongue, her accent carrying the careful precision her grandmother had drilled into her decades ago. And this document is a lie. Bruce stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. This is outrageous. She's a waitress. He turned to Mr. Castellano. Remove her. Now. But the Sheikh raised one hand, a small gesture that somehow silenced the entire room. Explain, he said to Benny, still in Arabic, testing her. Benny swallowed. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat, but her voice when it came was calm. The document references kahwa, coffee, as part of the trade rights being granted. But this charter is supposedly from 1020 AD. She paused, letting the words land. Coffee did not exist in the Arab world until the 15th century. The earliest records of coffee cultivation are from Yemen around 1400, 400 years after this document claims to have been written. Dr. Mansour, the Sheikh's advisor, leaned forward sharply. That cannot be correct. You examined the calligraphy, Benny said, not unkindly. The ink, the vellum, all of which can be forged with enough skill and money. But the forger made an error in meaning. They trusted science to do the work that only language can do. Silence. Bruce laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. This is absurd. She's a service worker with no credentials, no expertise. Dr. Harlow has spent 18 months authenticating this document. Benny turned to face him directly. It was the first time she had looked a man like Bruce Wallace in the eye in 8 years of working in this room. Then Dr. B. Harlow should have read more carefully, she said quietly. Or perhaps she did read carefully and hoped no one else would. Dr. Harlow's face went white. The Sheikh's lawyer was already flipping through the translated appendix, his fingers moving frantically. She's right, he said, his voice tight. The territorial description mentions coffee trade routes. It's in paragraph 14. That's a translation error, Bruce said quickly. A misinterpretation. It's not, Benny interrupted. I read the original. Kahwa has no other meaning. Whoever created this document was meticulous about chemistry and careless about history. Dr. Mansour had pulled out his magnifying glass again, but this time his hands were shaking. He traced the line Benny had indicated, his lips moving silently as he read. When he looked up, his face had aged 10 years. "She is correct, Your Excellency," he said hoarsely. I don't know how I missed it." The room turned. Benny could feel it, the invisible shift in gravity, the moment when power changed hands. Bruce Wallace was still standing, still wearing his expensive suit and predatory smile, but something behind his eyes had cracked. "Your Excellency," he said, his voice losing its smoothness, "this woman has no authority to—" "She has the only authority that matters," Sheikh Abdul Salam said coldly. He set down the pen. "The authority of truth." He turned to his lawyer. "Call security and contact the authorities." Bruce's composure finally shattered. "You're making a mistake. This deal is legitimate." "The deal," the Sheikh said, rising slowly from his chair, "is dead." Benny stood motionless as the room erupted around her. Lawyers shouting, security moving in, Bruce Wallace backing toward the door with his hands raised in hollow protest. For the first time in 20 years, someone was looking directly at her. And she did not look away. The room had not stopped moving since Benny spoke. Security personnel flanked Bruce Wallace near the door. Dr. Harlow sat frozen in her chair, staring at the document as if it had betrayed her. The Sheikh's lawyer, a sharp-eyed man named Harrison, was bent over the contract with a penlight, flipping pages with increasing urgency. Benny had stepped back against the wall, her heart still hammering. She had done what she came to do. She had spoken. Now she waited for the world to decide what to do with her. "Your Excellency," Harrison said suddenly. His voice had changed, gone tight and strange. "You need to see this." Sheikh Abdul Salam turned from where he had been watching Bruce. "What is it?" Harrison didn't answer immediately. He was reading the same paragraph over and over, his lips moving silently. When he finally looked up, his face was grey. "The forgery wasn't the trap," he said slowly. "The forgery was the bait." The Sheikh crossed the room in 3 steps. "Explain." Harrison pointed to a dense block of text near the back of the contract. The section no one reads, the legal architecture buried beneath ceremony and sentiment. "There's an arbitration clause here, Section 14, subsection C. It states that if, at any point after signing, the foundational document is proven fraudulent or materially misrepresented, all territorial claims derived from that document are permanently forfeited." Benny felt her stomach drop. "Permanently," Harrison repeated, as if he couldn't believe the word himself. "Not contested, not reviewed, forfeited. Your family's claims, the legitimate ones, the ones you've been building for decades, would be erased, legally, irrevocably." Dr. Mansour's face had gone white. "They wanted us to sign a forgery that would eventually be discovered?" "Yes." Harrison's voice was barely a whisper. "The $200 million was never the prize. It was the hook. They were going to let you win this document, let you present it in court, let you stake your entire legal position on its authenticity, and then they would expose it themselves, from the inside." Benny understood now. The elegance of it, the cruelty. This wasn't theft. This was annihilation. Bruce Wallace and whoever stood behind him hadn't wanted Sheikh Abdul Salam's money. They wanted his future. They wanted to destroy not just his claim, but the possibility of any claim. They wanted to turn his own hope into the weapon that killed his legacy. The document was designed to fail. The forgery was meant to be discovered. Just not tonight. Not by a waitress with a grandmother who taught her to listen. Bruce had stopped protesting. He stood between 2 security guards, his silver hair slightly disheveled, his expensive suit suddenly looking like a costume. The mask had slipped completely now. Beneath the charm, beneath the polish, there was something cold and cornered. "You can't prove any of this," he said, but his voice had lost its music. "This is speculation. Conspiracy theory." "Is it?" Sheikh Abdul Salam's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of generations. "You came to me with a document that references a commodity that didn't exist for 400 years after its supposed creation. You buried a clause that would have destroyed my family's claims if I had signed. And you expected no one in this room to notice." He stepped closer to Bruce, close enough that the security guards tensed. "You didn't account for her." The Sheikh gestured toward Benny without looking away from Bruce's face. "You didn't account for the possibility that someone invisible might see more clearly than all your experts combined." Bruce said nothing. "Call the FBI," the Sheikh said to Harrison. "Wire fraud, international document forgery, whatever else applies." He finally turned away from Bruce, dismissing him like a servant. "I want to know who else is behind this. I want to know how deep it goes." Benny watched as Bruce Wallace was escorted from the room, not in handcuffs, not yet, but with the particular posture of a man who understood that his life had just changed permanently. Dr. Harlow was crying quietly, whether from guilt or fear, Benny couldn't tell. The document still lay on the table, beautiful and poisonous, a masterpiece of deception that had failed because of a single word. Kawa. Coffee. Her grandmother would have laughed. The room emptied slowly, then all at once. Security escorted Bruce Wallace and Dr. Harlow to separate holding areas. Harrison departed with his phone pressed to his ear, already coordinating with federal authorities. Dr. Mansour lingered longest, staring at the forged document with the hollow expression of a man reviewing every mistake he'd ever made. Then he, too, was gone. The private dining room, which had held so much noise, so much consequence, fell into a silence so complete that Benny could hear the rain still streaking the windows. She should leave, she knew that. Her shift was technically over. Mr. Castellano had disappeared somewhere, probably drafting the termination letter in his head. She had broken every rule. She had spoken when she was supposed to be invisible. But Sheikh Abdul Salam was still sitting at the table, and he had not dismissed her. "Please," he said quietly, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Sit." Benny hesitated. In 8 years, she had never sat in one of these chairs. She had served people who sat in them. She had cleared their plates, refilled their glasses, absorbed their conversations without acknowledgement. The chairs were not for people like her. But the Sheikh was waiting. She sat. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The forged document still lay between them, its elegant calligraphy gleaming under the soft light. "Who are you?" the Sheikh finally asked, not demanding, genuinely curious. "And please, do not tell me you are a waitress." Benny exhaled slowly. The question she had avoided for 20 years. "My name is Benita Brooks," she said. "I was a graduate student at Columbia. Linguistics. I specialized in Semitic languages and historical Arabic dialects." She paused, the old grief surfacing like water through cracks. "I was 2 semesters from finishing my master's when my mother had a stroke. I had to leave. I never went back." The Sheikh listened without interrupting. "My grandmother taught me Arabic," Benny continued, "in Birmingham, Alabama, at her kitchen table. She learned it from a missionary when she was young. She always said that language carries souls, that if you listen carefully enough, words will tell you when something is lying." She looked at the document. "I heard it lying, that's all." Sheikh Abdul Salam was quiet for a long time. "I brought 3 experts tonight," he said finally. "Men and women with degrees from Oxford, Cambridge, the Sorbonne. They examined this document for months. They ran tests I cannot even pronounce. And not one of them, not one, heard what you heard." Benny shook her head. "They weren't listening for lies. They were listening for confirmation. And you? I wasn't listening for anything. I just felt it. The rhythm was wrong, like a song with a note that doesn't belong." The Sheikh studied her face, really studied it. "The way you look at something you're trying to understand, rather than something you're trying to use." "I have spent my life surrounded by experts," he said slowly. "Brilliant people, credentialed people. And tonight I learned that credentials can be bought, expertise can be fooled, and the most dangerous lies come wrapped in the most beautiful packages." He leaned forward slightly. "I need someone who listens for lies, someone who hears what others miss. I am building a compliance division within my US operations, a team dedicated to verifying historical documents and detecting fraud before it reaches my desk." He paused. "I would like you to lead it." Benny's breath caught. "I'm not." She stopped. "I'm not qualified. I'm not ready. I'm not the kind of person who leads anything." But the words felt hollow even before she spoke them. Hadn't she spent 20 years believing she was invisible? Hadn't she built her entire life around the assumption that the world had no place for someone like her? "I haven't finished my degree," she said instead. "I don't have credentials." "You have something better," the Sheikh replied. "You have ears that hear truth, and you have the courage to speak it when everyone else is silent." He stood, straightening his suit jacket. "Think about it. Take whatever time you need, but know this." He met her eyes directly, without pity, without condescension. "You saved more than my money tonight. You saved my family's future. That is not something I forget." He walked toward the door, then paused. "Being seen is frightening, Miss Brooks. I understand that. But you were never truly invisible." He glanced back at her. "You were just waiting for someone to look." 1 year later, Benita Brooks stood at the head of a conference table in a sunlit office overlooking Central Park. She no longer wore a uniform. The room held 12 people, forensic accountants, linguistic analysts, former federal investigators, all of them watching her with the kind of attention she had spent decades avoiding. On the screen behind her, a slide displayed a forged Ottoman-era deed that had nearly cost a Dubai investment firm $80 million. "The calligraphy is perfect," Benny said, pointing to a line of elegant Arabic script. "The vellum is authentic. The ink composition matches every database we have. But look here." She circled a phrase with her laser pointer. "This contract references a shipping route through the Suez Canal. The document is dated 1 CQ Chapter Per Candes, R. 1840 pairs. The Suez Canal was not completed until 1869. A murmur rippled through the room. "Forgers trust chemistry," Benny continued. "They trust science. They trust that we'll be so dazzled by the packaging that we won't read the words. Our job is to read the words." She clicked to the next slide. "Questions?" The Abdul Salam Historical Verification Unit had been operational for 11 months. In that time, Benny's team had intercepted 14 fraudulent documents, prevented over $340 million in potential losses, and consulted on 3 federal investigations. Bruce Wallace had pleaded guilty to wire fraud and conspiracy in March. He was currently serving 12 years in a federal facility in Connecticut. Dr. Harlow, who had cooperated with prosecutors, received a suspended sentence and the permanent destruction of her academic reputation. The network behind them, a loose consortium of forgers, corrupt historians, and offshore money launderers, was still being dismantled, one indictment at a time. Sheikh Abdul Salam's legitimate territorial claims had proceeded through international courts without the poisoned document. The case was ongoing, but his lawyers were optimistic. More importantly, his family's legacy remained intact, uncompromised by the trap that had been set for him, all because a waitress had noticed a word that didn't belong. After the meeting, Benny returned to her office, a corner room with floor-to-ceiling windows and a desk that still felt too large for her. On the wall hung a framed photograph, a weathered black woman with silver hair and knowing eyes standing in front of a small house in Birmingham. Esther May Brooks, 1928-2011. Benny had placed the photo there on her first day. Some mornings, she still talked to it. "Look at me, Grandma. Look where your kitchen table led." The debt was gone. The exhaustion had softened into something manageable. She had hired a part-time caregiver for her mother, who had stabilized enough to recognize Benny's face on good days, to squeeze her hand and whisper proud in a voice that still carried the echo of the woman she used to be. Benny had even returned to Columbia, not as a student, but as a guest lecturer. Next fall, she would teach a seminar on linguistic forensics and historical document fraud. The department that had once let her slip away without a fight had invited her back with something like reverence. She hadn't decided whether to accept. Some wounds heal, others simply stop bleeding. On quiet evenings, when the office emptied and the city hummed 40 floors below, Benny sometimes thought about the woman she used to be, the one who poured water and cleared plates and kept her eyes down, the one who believed that invisibility was the price of survival. She didn't hate that woman. She understood her, but she no longer wanted to be her. There's a story people tell now in certain circles, among fraud investigators, forensic linguists, the lawyers who handle disputes worth more than small nations. The story of a $200 million scam that collapsed because of a single word. The story of a waitress who spoke Arabic. Most of them don't know Benny's name. They don't know about her grandmother, or the kitchen table, or the 20 years she spent invisible in rooms full of powerful men. But the story survives anyway. It passes from conference to conference, courthouse to courthouse, a reminder that the most sophisticated lie can be undone by the simplest truth. And somewhere in that story is a lesson that Benny hopes someone hears. The most dangerous person in the room is the one you ignored.